It's a Saturday morning in November 1994. The automatic doors slide open with a pneumatic hiss, and immediately you're hit with it. That smell. New plastic, fresh cardboard, something sweet and synthetic that you can't quite name but instantly recognize. It's the smell of new toys, of unopened boxes, of possibility itself somehow distilled into an aroma. A child's laughter echoes across the polished linoleum floor, high and bright, bouncing off walls lined with boxes stacked 20 feet high. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, that constant electric buzz that becomes invisible after a few minutes. But right now, in this moment, it's part of the symphony. Squeaky shopping cart wheels rolling over floor tiles, a toddler crying somewhere near the back, that particular pitch of a 2-year-old who's been told no for the first time this morning. The rustling of plastic bags, the beep of registers, the shuffle of sneakers and dress shoes and light-up children's shoes, and underneath it, all, barely audible but definitely there, that jingle playing through the store speakers on an endless loop. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. A father holds his daughter's hand as they turn down the action figure aisle. She's maybe 7 years old, wearing light-up sneakers that flash red and blue with each step, leaving a trail of brief illumination behind her. Her eyes are wide, scanning the shelves with an intensity usually reserved for much more important decisions. She has $5 birthday money in her pocket. $5 is a fortune. $5 can buy almost anything in the world, or at least anything that matters right now. He watches her face, and you can see him calculating in his head. Birthday next month. Maybe that's the one she really wants, or maybe Christmas is close enough to wait. The mental arithmetic of parenting, balancing desire and budget and timing. She stops in front of a wall of Barbie dolls, their plastic faces smiling out from behind. Clear packaging, dozens of them, all identical, all perfect. Beach Barbie, Dr. Barbie, Astronaut Barbie. Each one a different dream, a different possible future. Her small hand reaches out, but doesn't quite touch the boxes, like they're museum artifacts she's been told are too precious to handle. Near the entrance, Jeffrey the giraffe stands 8 feet tall, a cardboard cutout with that permanent friendly smile. His spotted neck curves upward, reaching toward nothing in particular. A speech bubble emerges from his mouth. Best toys at the best prices. Behind the registers, teenage employees in red polo shirts scan items with practiced efficiency. Beep, beep, beep. The rhythm of commerce, the soundtrack of consumption. One of them is saving for a car. Another is putting themselves through community college. A third is working here because their older brother worked here. Because it's a good first job. Because the discount is useful with 2 younger siblings at home. Outside, the parking lot stretches for what seems like acres. Cars packed in tight rows like a mechanical crop. Minivans with car seats visible through rear windows. Station wagons with bikes strapped to the roof. A few sedans with elderly couples inside, grandparents on a mission. This is suburban America at its finest, at its most mundane and most magical simultaneously. This is a Saturday ritual. This is what weekends are made of when you have children, when your life revolves around their needs and wants and endless, exhausting energy. The store itself is massive, overwhelming in its abundance. 30,000 square feet of pure childhood imagination made physical. Aisles organized by category with military precision, each section color-coded and labeled. Action figures here, 3 full aisles of them. He-Man and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Power Rangers, and Batman and G.I. Joe. Board games there, stacked from floor to ceiling. Monopoly and Sorry and Clue and Life and 100. Variations you've never heard of. Video games along the back wall where older kids cluster around demo stations, controllers in hand, battling each other in Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter II. The sounds of digital combat mixing with everything else. Bicycles hanging from the ceiling like a strange mechanical forest. Training wheels attached to some. Streamers hanging from handlebars on others. Red ones and blue ones and pink ones and one spectacular green mountain bike that costs more than most families' monthly grocery budget. Baby toys in soft pastels, occupying their own section near the front, segregated from the chaos of the older kids' stuff. Plush animals and rattles, and those toys that claim to improve infant development, marketed to anxious new parents desperate to give their child every advantage. And above it all, suspended from the ceiling on fishing line, promotional characters. Woody from Toy Story hovering over the Disney section, a giant plastic dinosaur above the Jurassic Park merchandise. Seasonal decorations already creeping in, even though Thanksgiving hasn't happened yet, because Christmas planning starts in October now, September if you're really organized. This world felt permanent. It felt like it would exist forever, unchanging, waiting for the next generation and the next and the next. Like libraries or post offices or other civic infrastructure you assume will always be there. But worlds don't work that way. Nothing is permanent. Not even things that seem essential. Not even things that feel like they've always existed. And this one, this cathedral of childhood, this empire built on plastic and dreams and Saturday morning rituals, would be gone in less than 25 years. The story doesn't begin on that Saturday morning in 1994. It begins decades earlier, in the ashes of World War II, with a man who understood something fundamental about human nature. That children don't just want toys, they want everything. They want to be overwhelmed with choice. They want more options than any reasonable person could process. And parents, despite their better judgment, despite knowing it's excessive, want to give them that experience. Charles Lazarus was 25 years old in 1948 when he opened a baby furniture store in Washington, D.C. The store was called Children's Bargain Town, a name that promised exactly what it delivered. He'd just returned from World War II, had seen things no young man should see, witnessed destruction on an industrial scale, and decided to build something instead of destroy something. The store was small, practical, utilitarian. Cribs and high chairs and changing tables, strollers and playpens. The kind of things new parents needed in that post-war baby boom era when Americans were having children at unprecedented rates. But parents kept asking him for something else. Toys. Could he stock toys? Just a few? The war was over. Prosperity was returning. People wanted to spoil their children. A little. Give them the childhoods that had been interrupted by depression and war. And Lazarus, who was smart enough to listen to what customers actually wanted, rather than want, added a few toys to the inventory. Then a few more. Then entire aisles. Then he realized something that would change retail history. The furniture wasn't the business. The toys were the business. The margins were better. The turnover was faster. And the emotional component, the way children's eyes lit up when they saw something they wanted, that created a buying impulse furniture couldn't match. A parent might deliberate for weeks on a crib. But a toy? A toy was an impulse purchase enabled by a child's enthusiasm and a parent's desire to make them happy. By 1957, he'd pivoted entirely, opened a store focused exclusively on toys. Not a toy corner in a department store where you had to ask a clerk to retrieve items from behind a counter. Not a small selection mixed in with other. Children's goods, a toy superstore, self-service, overwhelming variety, warehouse-style shopping applied to playthings. The concept was revolutionary for its time, genuinely new in a way difficult to appreciate now, when superstores are the default model for nearly everything. The first true Toys R Us store opened in Rockville, Maryland in 1957. It was 18,000 square feet. Larger than most retail spaces of that era. The logo featured Geoffrey the giraffe from the beginning, though the character wouldn't be fully developed as a mascot until the 1970s. The backwards R in the name was deliberate, playful, meant to look like a child had written it with a crayon. Every detail was calculated to appeal to that sense of childlike wonder while also communicating value and selection to parents. The interior was designed to feel abundant, almost overwhelming. Toys stacked high, aisles packed with products. The message was clear. We have everything. Whatever toy exists in the world, we probably stock it. And if your child wants something specific, something they saw on television, or that their friend has, you can find it here. No more visiting 3 different stores, hoping someone has the toy in stock. One-stop shopping for childhood desires. The model worked. Not just worked, but exploded across the American landscape. By 1978, there were 72 stores. By 1983, that number had more than tripled to 169 stores spreading across suburbs and shopping centers nationwide. The company went public in 1978 at $15 per share, giving Wall Street investors a chance to own a piece of childhood retail. And they loved it. A toy superstore? In an age when specialty retail was becoming dominant, when category killers were emerging in every sector, this made perfect sense. Books had bookstores. Electronics had electronics stores. Why shouldn't toys have toy stores? The stock performed well. Investors made money. Charles Lazarus became wealthy, though he maintained he'd have done it even without the financial success. He genuinely loved toys, loved watching children experience that moment of pure joy when they found exactly what they wanted. He walked store aisles regularly, even as the chain expanded, watching customers, asking questions, noting what worked and what didn't. The 80s belonged to Toys R Us in ways hard to overstate. While America fell in love with consumption, with big cars and big houses and big everything, while shopping became not just an activity, but a cultural identity, Toys R Us grew bigger too. New stores opened every month, sometimes every week during peak expansion periods. The company expanded internationally, entering Canada first in 1984, then Europe starting in 1985, then Asia by the late 80s. Each new country required localization, understanding local preferences and regulatory environments, but the core model translated surprisingly well across cultures. Children everywhere wanted toys. Parents everywhere wanted to make their children happy. By 1990, there were 497 stores. By 1996, that number hit 653. The company wasn't just growing, it was dominating. Toy manufacturers structured their entire business around Toys R Us's buying power. When the company's buyers said they'd stock a new product line, manufacturers ramped up production with confidence. When Toys R Us said no, manufacturers reconsidered whether the product was viable at all. The peak came in the late 90s and early 2000s, that golden moment before everything changed. 876 stores across the United States, another 716 stores internationally through various partnerships and wholly owned subsidiaries. Total global footprint, 1,592 stores in 38 countries on 6 continents. The company employed 64,000 people during peak season, more than 70,000 when you included international operations. Annual revenue reached $13 billion in fiscal year 2005. Market share of the U.S. toy industry, 20%. 1 in every 5 toys purchased in America came from a Toys R Us store. The company's buying power was extraordinary. Manufacturers gave Toys R Us exclusive products, early access to new releases, promotional support. The company could demand better pricing than any competitor because of volume. They could negotiate payment terms that essentially meant suppliers were financing Toys R Us's inventory. The company turned inventory faster than traditional retailers, meaning products spent less time on shelves, reducing carrying costs. Toys R Us also pioneered various retail strategies that seem obvious now, but were innovative then. Extended holiday hours during peak season, price match guarantees to combat competitors, a comprehensive catalog mailed to millions of households each fall, essentially free marketing that customers looked forward to receiving. The catalog became legendary, hundreds of pages thick, organized by age and category, with a special section for hot toys that would inevitably sell out. Children developed rituals around the catalog, sitting on bedroom floors with markers and pens, circling items, building wish lists that grew longer each year. Parents learned to read between the lines, figuring out what their child really wanted versus what they'd forgotten about by the next page. Some families kept old catalogs, creating an archive of changing toy trends, miniature time capsules of what children desired in each era. In 2001, at the absolute peak of the company's power and influence, Toys R Us opened its flagship location in Times Square, New York City. The store was meant to be a statement, a declaration that Toys R Us wasn't just a suburban strip mall retailer, but a destination worthy of one of the world's most famous locations. The store occupied 110,000 square feet across 3 floors of prime Manhattan real estate. It featured a 60-foot indoor Ferris wheel that cost $400,000 by itself. Riders could see across Times Square from the top, the neon and digital billboards creating a surreal backdrop. Inside, a 20-foot-tall animatronic T-Rex roared on a programmed loop, its movement and sound designed by the same engineers who worked on theme park attractions. A life-size Barbie dream house you could walk through, every room decorated in that distinctive pink plastic aesthetic. 4,000 square feet dedicated entirely to Lego, including intricate models of New York landmarks built from millions of bricks, the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, the Brooklyn Bridge, all rendered in miniature plastic precision. A candy store occupied one corner. A full-scale model of the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars hung suspended from the ceiling. The store cost $35 million to build, an astronomical figure for retail space. But Toys R Us wasn't thinking about return on investment in traditional terms. This was marketing. This was brand building. This was a physical manifestation of the company's dominance. On opening day, November 15, 2001, just 2 months after September 11th, when New York desperately needed something joyful, the line to get in stretched for blocks. People waited 3 hours for the chance to ride a Ferris wheel inside a toy store. In its first full year, the Times Square store generated revenue of $60 million from that single location. Tourists made it a mandatory stop. Tour buses included it in their routes. Parents who'd grown up shopping at suburban Toys R Us stores brought their children to see this version, this ultimate expression of the brand. The store stayed open until 10 p.m. every night, until 11 p.m. on weekends. During the holidays, midnight wasn't unusual. Sales per square foot exceeded almost every other retail location in Manhattan. Geoffrey the Giraffe became a cultural icon on par with Ronald McDonald or Tony the Tiger. The mascot appeared in television, commercials that ran during Saturday morning cartoons and primetime family programming. Store appearances drew crowds. Birthday party packages included a visit from Geoffrey, or at least an employee in the costume. Children wrote him letters, asking for toys, sharing their lives, treating him as a real entity, despite knowing on some level it was make-believe. The jingle became embedded in American consciousness at a level few advertising campaigns ever achieve. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. There's a million toys at Toys R Us that I can play with. Simple lyrics set to a simple melody, but earworm effective. People who hadn't heard it in decades could still sing every word. It played in stores constantly, sometimes driving employees to distraction, but customers found it comforting, familiar, part of the experience. The company dominated the toy industry in ways difficult to imagine now, when retail power is fragmented across dozens of channels. When Toys R Us said they wouldn't stock a product, manufacturers panicked. That could kill a toy line before it launched. When they gave a toy prominent shelf placement, positioned it at the end of an aisle, or featured it in their catalog, that toy became a hit almost automatically. The company's buyers had more power over the toy industry than any single entity before or since. They could make or break a product line with a single decision. Birthday parties were held in stores, special events where children and their friends gathered for games and activities, and the opportunity to pick out a present with the birthday child's consultation. Kids clubs offered special memberships, mailings with exclusive offers, the feeling of belonging to something bigger. The Christmas catalog, arriving in mailboxes each October like clockwork, was thicker than some phone books. Children would spend hours poring over it, circling items in pen, building fantasy wish lists they knew they'd never fully receive but hoped for anyway. Parents learned to navigate the stores efficiently, developing strategies for getting in and out with only the intended purchase, though that rarely worked once the child spotted something new, something advertised on television, something a friend at school had mentioned. The stores were designed to prevent efficient shopping, to encourage browsing and impulse purchases. Toy companies paid for premium placement. Popular items were deliberately scattered throughout the store rather than consolidated in one area, forcing customers to walk past hundreds of other products. The psychology of it was sophisticated, placing candy and small toys near the registers for last-minute additions, positioning the most desired items toward the back, making customers traverse the entire store, creating a sense of abundance that made saying no feel mean, even when budgets were tight. The stores worked on children and parents simultaneously, different tactics for different audiences, but the same goal: sell more toys. Everything felt invincible. The stock price climbed steadily year after year, with only minor corrections during broader economic downturns. Analysts predicted continued growth indefinitely. Toys R Us was recession-proof, they said. People would always buy toys for their children. Even in hard times, especially in hard times, parents wanted to give their kids something to smile about. The business model seemed bulletproof, proven across decades and economic cycles. The company's executives spoke confidently about the future: plans for more stores, bigger stores, international expansion into China and India, where emerging middle classes represented untapped markets. Talk of acquisitions, buying up smaller toy chains to eliminate competition. Everything pointed upward on every chart that mattered. But cracks were forming, hairline fractures invisible to most observers, but obvious in retrospect. The kind of cracks that seem insignificant until the whole structure collapses. In 1992, Walmart began aggressively expanding their toy sections. The strategy was simple and brutal in its efficiency: use toys as loss leaders, sell them at or below cost to drive foot traffic, make the profit back on groceries and household goods and everything else Walmart sold. A customer coming in for a discounted toy might leave with a week's worth of groceries, a new tire for their car, prescriptions from the pharmacy. The toy was just bait. Toys R Us couldn't compete on price with this model. They were a specialty retailer. Toys were their only significant business. They couldn't afford to sell Hot Wheels cars for less than they paid for them just to drive traffic. There was no grocery section to make up the difference. Toy sales were the profit, not a marketing expense. Target followed the same playbook, creating colorful, well-designed toy sections that felt almost boutique compared to Toys R Us's warehouse aesthetic. Target appealed to a more affluent demographic, parents who wanted toys but also appreciated design and shopping experience. Suddenly, parents could buy toys while doing their regular shopping. The convenience factor mattered more than anyone at Toys R Us headquarters wanted to admit. A dedicated trip to the toy store versus grabbing something while buying milk and bread and laundry detergent. For many families, especially busy two-income households, the choice was easy. Market share began eroding slowly, nothing dramatic. 1 percentage point one year, another the next. But the trend was undeniable. Toys R Us still dominated, but the dominance wasn't absolute anymore. But the real threat wasn't visible yet, wasn't even recognized as a threat. In 1995, a company called Amazon sold its first book online. The website was primitive by today's standards. The selection was limited. The checkout process was clunky. Most people didn't have credit cards tied to internet accounts. Online shopping was a curiosity, something for early adopters and tech enthusiasts, not mainstream consumers. By 1999, Amazon had added toys to their catalog. The selection was still limited. The website was still clunky. But it was getting better, iteration by iteration. And some parents, particularly busy professionals comfortable with technology, started buying toys online. Not many. Not enough to show up as significant competition, but enough to be noticeable. Toys R Us recognized the internet represented something, though they weren't entirely sure what. The company had a website, but it was essentially a digital catalog. You could browse products but couldn't order them. That seemed acceptable. Toys were tactile products. Children needed to see them, touch them. Online shopping for toys seemed like a niche that would never grow beyond a small percentage of sales. In 2000, Toys R Us made a decision that seemed smart at the time, the kind of decision that looks reasonable to everyone involved until history proves otherwise. They partnered with Amazon for online sales, a 10-year exclusive deal. Amazon would handle the website, the logistics, the shipping, all the complicated technical infrastructure. Toys R Us would provide the products and toy expertise, the relationships with manufacturers, the inventory management. The company paid Amazon $50 million per year for this arrangement, plus 50% of profits from toy sales. It seemed like a win-win situation. Toys R Us got instant e-commerce capabilities without building the infrastructure themselves, without hiring web developers and warehouse staff, and all the complexity of online retail. Amazon got credibility in the toy category, and $50 million annually. Significant revenue for a company still establishing itself. Both sides thought they'd outsmarted the market. But the deal had a clause that would prove disastrous. Amazon was allowed to bring in other toy sellers if Toys R Us couldn't maintain adequate inventory levels, particularly during peak seasons like Christmas. It made sense contractually. Amazon couldn't have their website show out of stock on popular toys when other sellers had inventory, but it created a loophole large enough to drive a truck through. And Amazon did. They brought in other sellers. They let competitors sell toys on the same platform. Toys R Us was paying $50 million annually to use exclusively. Suddenly, customers shopping for toys on Amazon saw multiple options, multiple prices, multiple sellers. Toys R Us was just one option among many on a platform they were supposed to own exclusively. Toys R Us executives were furious. They argued this violated the spirit, if not the letter, of the agreement. Amazon pointed to the contract language about inventory availability. Lawyers got involved. Negotiations went nowhere. The partnership, which was supposed to solve Toys R Us's e-commerce problem, became a source of competitive disadvantage. In 2004, Toys R Us sued Amazon in New Jersey Superior Court. The case dragged through the legal system for 3 years, burning money on lawyers, while the retail world transformed around them. In 2006, a judge ruled in favor of Toys R Us and allowed them to terminate the agreement early. The company received a settlement of $51 million, barely covering their legal fees and the annual payments they'd made. But they'd lost 6 critical years in the digital transformation of retail. 6 years when Amazon refined their logistics, built customer loyalty, established themselves as the default destination for online shopping. By the time Toys R Us launched their own independent e-commerce platform in 2006, Amazon had already become dominant. The company had lost first-mover advantage in a race they didn't even know they were in until it was too late. The Toys R Us website launched in 2006 was functional but uninspired. It crashed during high traffic periods. The inventory system didn't integrate well with physical stores. Shipping was slow compared to Amazon Prime, which launched that same year, offering 2-day delivery for a flat annual fee. Customer reviews were limited. The recommendation engine was primitive. Every aspect of the online experience felt like it was built by a company whose heart wasn't in digital retail. But these problems, serious as they were, weren't what killed Toys R Us. The company was still profitable, still generating revenue in the billions, still relevant, still packed on weekends. They had problems, yes, but solvable problems, fixable problems. Companies adapt all the time. Retail evolves. There was no reason to think Toys R Us couldn't transform, given time and investment. What killed Toys R Us wasn't competition. It was debt. Specifically, it was debt the company never asked for, never needed, debt that was loaded onto the company's balance sheet not to fund growth or expansion, but to enrich a small group of investors. In 2005, 3 private equity firms approached Toys R Us with an offer: KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado Real Estate Trust. Together, they proposed buying the entire company for $6.6 billion. This was a leveraged buyout, a financial maneuver that had become increasingly common since the 1980s. The basic mechanics are simple, but the implications are profound. The math worked like this. The private equity firms put up roughly $1 billion of their own capital. They borrowed $5.3 billion from various banks and lenders, using the assets of Toys R Us as collateral. They used that borrowed money to buy all outstanding shares of Toys R Us stock and take the company private, removing it from public markets. Then, and this is the crucial part, they transferred that $5.3 billion debt onto the Toys R Us balance sheet. Read that again. The private equity firms borrowed money to buy a company, then made the company responsible for paying back the debt incurred to purchase it. It's like someone taking out a mortgage to buy your house, then forcing you to make the mortgage payments while they own the property. Suddenly, a company that had been moderately profitable, that had manageable debt levels, was carrying $5 billion in debt. The interest payments alone were over $400 million per year, sometimes reaching $470 million in high-interest periods. $400 million that could have been invested in store renovations, in e-commerce infrastructure, in competing with Amazon, in employee wages and training. Instead, it went to pay interest on debt the company never asked for. Imagine being a healthy adult living comfortably within your means. Then someone forces you to take out a massive loan you don't want or need. But you have to make the payments anyway. Every spare dollar goes to debt service. You can't save for the future. You can't make necessary investments in your home or health. You're just servicing debt, treading water, hoping nothing breaks because you can't afford to fix it. That's what happened to Toys R Us. The private equity playbook is well established by 2005. Buy a company with borrowed money. Cut costs aggressively to improve the appearance of profitability. Extract fees for management services, consulting services, advisory services. Load the company with debt. Then either sell it at a profit in a few years or take it public again at a higher valuation. If the company thrives, the private equity firms make enormous profits on their $1 billion investment. If the company fails, the private equity firms have already extracted their fees and recovered their initial investment through dividends and distributions. The debt holders, the employees, the suppliers, they're the ones who suffer. For Toys R Us, this meant frozen capital spending almost immediately. Store renovations stopped. The warehouses and distribution centers that desperately needed modernization to compete with Amazon's logistics stayed the same. The e-commerce platform remained years behind competitors because there was no money for serious investment. The company cut costs everywhere possible. Employee hours were reduced, store maintenance was deferred, positions eliminated through attrition. The customer experience slowly degraded, death by 1,000 small cuts. Walk into a Toys R Us store in 2010 and compare it to that Saturday morning in 1994. The floors aren't as clean. Someone should have mopped this morning, but there aren't enough staff scheduled. The shelves are dustier because deep cleaning happens less frequently now. Products are harder to find because there aren't enough employees to keep things organized and restocked. Inventory is less predictable because the ordering system is outdated. The lighting seems dimmer, though that might just be perception mixed with aging fixtures that should have been replaced. The bathrooms are less well maintained. The parking lot has potholes that won't be fixed this year or next. The whole experience feels tired in a way that's hard to articulate, but impossible to ignore once you notice it. The magic is fading. The stores feel like they're in managed decline, slowly deteriorating while trying to maintain the illusion of vitality. Meanwhile, Amazon was investing billions in fulfillment centers, in recommendation algorithms, in faster shipping, in customer service. Walmart was building out their online capabilities while also renovating physical stores. Target was redesigning stores to be brighter, cleaner, more modern, creating an experience people actually wanted to visit. Toys R Us was standing still, not by choice but because every spare dollar went to debt service. The private equity owners extracted fees throughout this period, management fees for managing the company they owned, consulting fees for consultants they hired, advisory fees for advice. Between 2005 and 2017, the private equity firms pulled out approximately $470 million in various fees, even as the company struggled to invest in its own future. This is legal. This is how leveraged buyouts work. These fees are disclosed, negotiated, part of the structure. But legal doesn't mean ethical. Legal doesn't mean it serves anyone's interest except the private equity firms. Toys R Us management tried to adapt within these constraints. They weren't incompetent or lazy. They launched initiatives. They tested new store formats, smaller footprints in urban areas. They expanded the baby products division, Babies R Us, which was actually growing while toy sales stagnated. They negotiated exclusive products with manufacturers. They tried to improve the online experience within budget constraints. They did everything possible with their hands tied behind their backs. But you can't outrun an avalanche while wearing cement shoes. Every year, the debt burden grew heavier. Every year, competitors invested more. Every year, customer expectations evolved faster than Toys R Us could adapt. Sales started declining, first slowly, then faster, then accelerating. Comparable store sales, the critical metric that measures performance of stores open at least a year, dropped 2% one year, 3% the next, 5% the year after that. Each decline meant less revenue to service the debt, less cash flow, less ability to invest. The spiral had begun, and everyone could see where it led, but nobody could stop it. Toy manufacturers started getting nervous. Mattel and Hasbro, who depended on Toys R Us for significant portions of their revenue, sometimes 15 to 20% of total sales, watched the decline with growing concern. They couldn't abandon the retailer without hurting their own businesses. Toys R Us still moved enormous volume, but they also couldn't afford to extend too much credit to a company drowning in debt, a company that might not survive long enough to pay its bills. Credit terms tightened. Instead of manufacturers shipping products and waiting 60 or 90 days for payment, they demanded faster payment or shorter terms. This squeezed Toys R Us's cash flow further. They needed inventory for the Christmas season, the make-or-break period that generated 40% of annual revenue, but manufacturers wanted payment faster than the company could generate it from sales. The 2016 holiday season was particularly brutal. Online sales surged across all retail categories. Amazon's share of toy sales hit 38% that year, up from 25% just 3 years earlier. Toys R Us managed just 4% of online toy sales, despite having hundreds of physical stores that should have given them an advantage for online ordering with in-store pickup. The company had invested in their e-commerce platform by this point, but too little, too late. The technology was still clunky compared to Amazon. The website crashed. During peak traffic periods like Black Friday and Cyber Monday, the exact moments when they most needed it to work, delivery times couldn't match Amazon Prime. The return process was complicated. Every friction point in the customer experience sent shoppers back to Amazon. After Christmas 2016, the company's leadership knew they were in crisis. Sales had declined significantly. Debt payments were coming due. Banks were getting nervous. The private equity owners held emergency meetings. Options were limited, and none were good. In September 2017, Toys R Us filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The announcement shocked casual observers, who still saw stores full of customers every weekend. But industry watchers had seen it coming for years. The company owed over $5 billion to creditors. The bankruptcy was meant to be a reorganization, not a liquidation. A chance to shed some debt, restructure payment terms, eliminate unprofitable stores while keeping the profitable ones. Management expressed optimism about emerging stronger, leaner, more competitive. The bankruptcy filing itself didn't have to be a death sentence. Many retail chains have filed for bankruptcy and survived. Circuit City didn't. Radio Shack didn't. But others, like Marvel Comics or General Motors, emerged restructured and viable. There was no reason Toys R Us couldn't be one of the survivors. Christmas 2017 was strange and sad. Stores stayed open, still decorated, still playing the jingle. But customers worried. Would gift cards be honored? Would returns be accepted after the holidays? Would the toys I buy today still have warranty support next month? Some shoppers avoided the stores entirely, not wanting to take the risk. This created a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sales suffered further. The company that needed a strong Christmas season to prove viability instead posted disappointing numbers that reinforced every fear about its future. In January 2018, the bankruptcy court and creditors reviewed the numbers. They were bad, worse than expected. The holiday season hadn't generated enough cash to stabilize operations. Suppliers were refusing to ship merchandise for the spring season without upfront payment. Banks were unwilling to extend more credit. The company was running out of cash, running out of time, running out of options. In March 2018, Toys R Us announced it would liquidate the U.S. operations entirely. Not restructure, not emerge smaller. Liquidate. Close every single store. All 735 remaining U.S. locations would close permanently. 33,000 employees would lose their jobs. The iconic brand that had defined childhood retail for 60 years was going out of business. The liquidation sales began immediately. Yellow signs appeared in windows. Store closing. Everything must go. All sales final. The percentage discounts started small, 10 or 20%, then increased weekly as the inventory cleared. 30% off, 50% off, 70% off. The fixtures themselves eventually went on sale. The shelving units, the registers, the Jeffrey cutouts. Everything had a price. Everything was for sale. Nothing was sacred. Those final weeks had an apocalyptic quality that anyone who experienced them won't forget. The stores felt like carcasses being picked clean. Shelves emptied, but weren't restocked. Popular items vanished immediately. What remained was the dregs, the toys nobody wanted even at deep discounts. The clearance bins that were usually tucked in a corner now occupied half the store. Employees who'd worked there for decades, who'd started as teenagers and worked their way into management, wore forced smiles while directing customers to picked-over inventory. Many found out about the liquidation from news reports, not from corporate communication. They showed up for shifts in March, not knowing if they'd have a job in April. Some stores tried to maintain dignity, treating those final weeks with professionalism. Others descended into chaos. Employees understandably focused on finding their next job rather than preserving the customer experience in a dying store. Parents brought their children one last time, explaining that this place, this store where they'd bought their toys, where birthday money had been spent and Christmas wishes fulfilled, was going away forever. Some children understood. Others didn't. Asking why, asking when it would reopen, not comprehending permanence. The Times Square flagship closed on December 30th, 2018. The Ferris wheel stopped spinning for the final time. The animatronic T-Rex roared its last mechanical roar, then fell silent. The Lego models were dismantled and sold. The building would eventually become office space, expensive Manhattan real estate too valuable to remain a toy store once the brand was gone. By early 2019, every Toys R Us store in America had gone dark. The parking lots sat empty, weeds beginning to push through. Pavement cracks. The signs came down. In some locations, the building sat vacant for months or years. Too large for most retail concepts, too expensive to subdivide or renovate. In others, new tenants moved in quickly. Spirit Halloween stores, the seasonal pop-up chain, moved into several locations, a bit of retail irony too perfect to ignore. Dead retail space hosting a store that celebrates death, operating 3 months a year, then vanishing again. Some buildings became grocery stores, the square footage about right for a mid-sized supermarket. Some became furniture stores or fitness centers. Some got subdivided into multiple smaller retail spaces. But even with new tenants, the buildings are identifiable. That particular architecture, the warehouse-style structure with the angled roofline, was distinctive to Toys R Us. Drive past one even now and you recognize it, even without signage, even with a different business inside. So what happened? That's the question everyone wants. Answered cleanly, simply, with a single cause. Was it the debt? Was it Amazon? Was it Walmart? Was it poor management? Was it the shift to digital entertainment? People want clarity, want to assign blame, want to understand exactly why something died so they can feel like the world makes sense. The honest answer is yes. All of it. A perfect storm of factors that alone might have been survivable, but together proved fatal. Like asking what killed a person who drowned in a flood during a hurricane while having a heart attack. Everything contributed. Everything mattered. The debt crippled the company's ability to adapt. That's undeniable. $400 million per year in interest payments is $400 million that couldn't be invested in the business. Over 12 years, that's nearly $5 billion in interest alone. Money that went to banks and lenders, rather than store improvements, or technology, or employees. Competitors were spending billions to transform retail for the 21st century. Walmart invested $11 billion in e-commerce between 2016 and 2018 alone. Amazon invested even more. Toys R Us couldn't match that investment because they were too busy servicing debt they didn't choose. But even without the debt, the challenges were immense. Amazon fundamentally changed how people buy toys. The convenience of ordering online, browsing from your couch while your children sleep, having it delivered to your door, skipping the store trip entirely. For busy parents, this is incredibly appealing. No traffic, no parking, no navigating crowded aisles, no tantrums when you say no to impulse purchases, no lines at checkout. Just click, buy, done. The toy arrives in 2 days, sometimes one, sometimes the same day in major cities. Toys R Us's entire model was built on the in-store experience, on overwhelming selection creating impulse purchases, on children seeing toys they didn't know existed and suddenly needing them immediately. On the experience of browsing, touching, comparing. That model was becoming obsolete, not for everyone, but for enough people to matter. The percentage of toy sales happening online grew every year. 5% became 10%, became 20%, became 35%. And Toys R Us never captured their fair share of that online growth. Walmart and Target offered something too. Convenience of one-stop shopping. Buy groceries, buy toys, buy clothes, buy pharmacy items, buy everything you need in one trip. Toys R Us couldn't compete with that. They only sold toys, baby products, and some seasonal items. There's no such thing as impulse grocery shopping at a toy store. The dedicated trip became harder to justify when other retailers sold the same toys while you were already there for other necessities. Then there's the broader cultural shift in how children play. This isn't about technology replacing toys entirely, though that narrative gets repeated. Children still play with physical toys. The toy industry hasn't collapsed, but it's changed. Video games, apps, streaming content, YouTube videos. These compete for attention and dollars that might have gone to action figures and board games. A parent with a limited budget decides between a new tablet or a basket of toys. Increasingly, the tablet wins. Toys R Us struggled to adapt to this shift. The stores were organized around traditional toy categories established decades earlier. Action figures, dolls, board games, ride-on toys. But where do you put coding robots, educational apps, STEM learning systems that blend physical and digital? The company tried to evolve their merchandising but always felt a step behind, still thinking in categories that made sense in 1985 but felt dated by 2015. Management made mistakes too. The Amazon partnership in 2000 was a disaster in retrospect, though it seemed reasonable at the time. Plenty of smart people thought partnering with an established e-commerce platform made more sense than building one from scratch. They were wrong, but it wasn't obviously wrong when the decision was made. The company was slow to develop its own e-commerce capabilities even after the Amazon partnership ended. They didn't invest enough in store experience to make physical shopping compelling enough to overcome online convenience. They didn't leverage their store network for online to offline integration, like buy online, pick up in store, which became crucial for brick-and-mortar survival. They didn't create experiential retail, play areas, and events that Amazon can't replicate. The baby products division, Babies R Us, showed promise and was actually growing even as toy sales declined. But the company never separated the divisions financially or strategically. When Toys R Us went bankrupt, Babies R Us went down with it, even though that business might have survived independently. Some argue that nothing could have saved Toys R Us, that the company was always going to die, that specialty retail of this type can't survive in modern America. Look at what happened to Borders Books, which filed for bankruptcy in 2011, Tower Records, which liquidated in 2006, Radio Shack, which filed for bankruptcy in 2015, Circuit City, liquidated in 2009. Entire categories of retail have vanished or contracted dramatically. Bookstores, music stores, electronics stores. The category killer retail model that seemed unstoppable in the 1990s proved fragile when e-commerce emerged. But others point to companies like Best Buy, which faced an existential crisis in the early 2010s when everyone predicted Amazon would destroy them. Best Buy survived through radical transformation, price matching to eliminate showrooming, investing heavily in online integration, creating the Geek Squad services, redesigning stores, improving employee training. Maybe Toys R Us could have found a similar path, if not for the debt burden. Or maybe not. The counterfactual is unknowable. We'll never know what Toys R Us could have become if those three private equity firms hadn't bought it in 2005, because that purchase fundamentally changed the company's trajectory and eliminated most strategic options. What we know for certain is that 33,000 people lost their jobs with limited severance and notice. Many were store-level employees without college degrees who'd spent years or decades at the company. Finding equivalent work proved difficult for many. The bankruptcy cost creditors billions of dollars, including pension funds and institutional investors who held Toys R Us bonds. The private equity firms lost their initial investment, though they had already extracted hundreds of millions in fees over 12 years. Nobody involved except the lawyers and liquidators came out ahead. The bankruptcy proceedings revealed ugly details. The private equity firms had taken out roughly $2 billion in dividends and distributions during their ownership, money extracted from the company, even as it struggled. They'd paid themselves management fees while cutting employee wages and benefits. They'd made strategic decisions that prioritized short-term returns over long-term viability. All of this was legal, disclosed, part of how private equity operates. But legality doesn't mean it's right. Some former employees sued, arguing they were owed severance that wasn't paid. The bankruptcy court eventually approved a $20 million hardship fund, far less than what employees said they were owed. But it was something. The private equity firms contributed to the fund, calling it voluntary assistance while denying any legal obligation. Toy manufacturers took significant losses. Mattel wrote off over $100 million in debt owed by Toys R Us. Hasbro lost similarly. Smaller toy companies, those that depended more heavily on Toys R Us for revenue, suffered even more. Some went out of business entirely. The sudden loss of their biggest customer created a cascade of failures through the supply chain. Geoffrey the giraffe, the beloved mascot, was retired. The character that had been a friend to millions of children over decades, that represented childhood joy and excitement, was essentially killed along with the company. Later attempts to resurrect the character felt hollow, marketing exercises rather than genuine cultural touchstones. Some entrepreneurs tried to resurrect the brand. In 2019, a new Toys R Us concept opened inside Macy's stores, small branded sections within the department store. It wasn't the same. You can't capture the magic of a 30,000 square foot toy warehouse in an 800 square foot corner of a department store. The selection was limited. The experience felt like a museum exhibit about Toys R Us, rather than the actual thing. Geoffrey's Toy Box opened a few standalone locations in 2021 and 2022. Small format stores, maybe 10,000 square feet. They're fine. Nice even. Better selection than the Macy's sections. But they're not Toys R Us. They're something else, wearing the costume, trying to resurrect something that can't be resurrected because the world has changed too much. The brand name still has value, still generates recognition and nostalgia. In 2022, WHP Global, a brand licensing company, announced plans to open new Toys R Us stores. As of 2024, there are roughly 30 locations in the United States, plus some international stores that never closed. The business model is different now. Much smaller stores, more focus on exclusive products, heavy emphasis on experiential retail, play areas, and events. They're trying to be what Toys R Us should have evolved into 15 years ago, but it's unclear if the market still exists for dedicated toy stores at any significant scale. Those 30 new locations represent less than 5% of the footprint that existed in 2017. The company is a shadow of what it was, and may never be more than that. Drive past a former Toys R Us. Location today, and you'll find various occupants or none at all. Some became Aldi or little grocery stores, European chains expanding into America. Some became Planet Fitness locations, the square footage working well for a gym. Some house furniture stores or home goods retailers. Some medical facilities or urgent care clinics. Some still sit vacant years later, too large and too expensive for most retailers, especially in an era when everyone is downsizing physical footprints in favor of online sales. The really tragic ones are in malls. Toys R Us often served as an anchor tenant, one of the major stores that drew customers to the mall who then browsed smaller stores. Without Toys R Us, foot traffic declined. Other stores struggled. Some malls have never recovered from losing their anchors. The vacant Toys R Us space sits empty, too expensive to subdivide, too large for any single new tenant, a blank space where joy used to exist. The cultural memory remains stronger than you might expect for a retail chain. Online, people share nostalgic photos of childhood shopping trips, of birthday parties held in stores, of Christmas Eves frantically searching for the hot toy. The Toys R Us jingle still triggers immediate recognition for anyone who grew up between 1970 and 2010, multiple generations connected by that simple melody. There's something about the specificity of the loss that resonates. It's not just that a company failed. Companies fail constantly. It's that a ritual of childhood ended. The Saturday morning trip to browse toys, to dream about what you might get for your birthday, to experience overwhelming abundance of possibility. That's what died. That's what can't be replaced by scrolling through Amazon listings. Parents today shop for toys differently. They scroll through Amazon while sitting on the couch, maybe showing their child the screen, maybe not. They read reviews. They compare prices across sites. They make informed, rational purchasing decisions. It's efficient. It's often cheaper. But something is lost that's hard to quantify or explain to someone who never experienced it. The physical experience of being in a space designed entirely around your desires as a child. Walking down aisles where everything, every single thing, is for you. Where adult concerns about mortgages and politics and work stress don't intrude for a few blessed minutes. Where the only question is, which toy, not whether you deserve joy. That particular magic is gone, or at least much harder to find. It's 5 p.m. now. The light is fading. The parking lot where a Toys R Us once stood is mostly empty. A few cars scattered near the new tenant, whatever business moved in. The pavement is cracked, lines faded, weeds pushing through asphalt. The light posts are still there, evenly spaced, though some bulbs are out. This was a busy place once. Now it's forgotten infrastructure, serving a different purpose or no purpose at all. Close your eyes, and you can almost hear it if you try. The squeaky shopping cart wheels on linoleum, the children's laughter echoing off high ceilings, that jingle playing through speakers on endless repeat, the beep of registers, the rustle of plastic bags, the sounds of commerce and joy combined. Or maybe you can't hear it at all. Maybe it's gone completely, that sound, that feeling. Maybe it only exists in memory now, getting hazier with each passing year as the details fade and blend together. The children who shopped there in the 90s are in their 30s now, many with children of their own. They tell their kids about Toys R Us, trying to explain what made it special, and the kids listen politely, but don't really understand. How could they? You can't explain the feeling of a place that no longer exists. Was Toys R Us a victim of poor management or financial manipulation or technological disruption or changing consumer preferences? The answer is yes, all of those in proportions we can debate. Forever. Multiple failures, multiple causes, all compounding until the structure couldn't support itself anymore. Was anything lost that can't be replaced? Pragmatically, no. Every toy that was in Toys R Us is available somewhere else, usually cheaper, usually with faster delivery. The function is replaced completely. But functions aren't everything. The ritual is lost, the destination, the experience of a place that existed specifically and only for this one purpose. Perhaps that's what bothers people most about the loss. Not the company's failure itself, but what it represents. The flattening of experience into transactions. The optimization of childhood into algorithms and shopping carts and two-day delivery. The replacement of physical places with digital convenience. These changes have real benefits. They make life easier in measurable ways. But something is lost in the trade. Something harder to quantify than shipping costs and price comparisons. Every generation believes the world of their childhood was better, more innocent, more magical. This is a bias, a trick of memory and nostalgia. But sometimes things genuinely are lost, and sometimes those things mattered more than we realized until they were gone. The Toys R Us stores are gone, most of them. The few that remain are different, smaller, changed, trying to be something the original never was. The empire that employed 64,000 people and generated $13 billion annually and occupied 1,592 physical locations across the world has been reduced to brand licensing deals and a few experimental retail spaces that don't feel connected to what came before. In another decade, children will have no memory of what it was like. The nostalgia will fade as those who remember grow older and eventually die. Geoffrey the giraffe will become a curiosity, a mascot from a bygone era, like Speedy Alka-Seltzer or the Quaker Oats Man. The jingle will be forgotten, the melody lost except in YouTube, compilations of 80s and 90s commercials. Or maybe not. Maybe something about what Toys R Us represented will persist beyond the company itself. The idea that children deserve spaces designed specifically for them. That abundance and overwhelming choice can be magical. That some experiences can't be reduced to online efficiency. Maybe someone will figure out how to make that work in modern retail. Maybe they already have and we just don't recognize it yet because it doesn't look like it used to. But probably not. Probably that era is simply over. Finished. A period of retail history that had its moment and passed. Probably our children and grandchildren will shop for toys the same way they shop for everything else, scrolling through infinite digital catalogs, devices in hand, physical stores just one option among many, not the default anymore. Probably retail will continue consolidating into fewer, larger players who can compete on logistics and price. Probably the future looks more like Amazon and less like Toys R Us. Stand in that empty parking lot a little longer. Let the silence settle. Let the evening come. This is where childhood came to shop on Saturday mornings. This is where birthdays were celebrated and Christmas wishes formed. This is where parents indulged their children and their own memories simultaneously. This is where Geoffrey smiled down from his cutout and promised that growing up could wait, that being a kid was enough for now, that the world held infinite possibilities if you just looked in the right aisle. The pavement is cold under your feet. The wind picks up a plastic bag, sends it tumbling across empty spaces. A car passes on the road beyond, headlights cutting through dusk. Someone going home, going to dinner, going about their life without noticing this place, or what it used to be. For a moment, just a moment, you could swear you heard it. That jingle. Faint, distant, barely there. Maybe just imagination or maybe something, carried on the wind from somewhere else. I don't want to grow up. None of us did. None of us do. But we don't get that choice. Time moves forward whether we're ready or not. The places we loved disappear. The rituals we cherished fade. The world changes, and we change with it. And sometimes we look back and barely recognize what we've lost until it's too late to preserve it. This was a toy store. It sold plastic and dreams. It created memories and magic. It employed thousands and served millions. It represented something about American childhood and consumer culture, and the way we love our children by giving them things. And now it's gone. All that remains are stories and memories and empty buildings, and a question nobody can quite answer. Was this inevitable? Or could it have been different? Could Toys R Us have survived in some form if different decisions had been made? If debt hadn't crushed possibility? If the world had changed just a little slower? We'll never know. The experiment ended. The data is incomplete, the conclusions remain ambiguous. All we have is what happened, which is that something big and loud and colorful and joyful got smaller and quieter and duller until it disappeared almost completely. And maybe that's the real story. Not about business models or debt or digital disruption, but about how nothing lasts forever. How even things that feel permanent eventually fade. How every generation inherits a world different from the one their parents knew, and their children will inherit something different still. The Toys R Us that existed in 1994 couldn't survive in 2024. Maybe a different version could have. Maybe not. But the version that existed, with its massive stores and overwhelming selection and belief that children deserved abundance, that version is gone. The parking lot is empty now, fully dark. Time to go. There's nothing left to see here. But for those who remember, who spent Saturday mornings in those aisles, who heard that jingle 1,000 times, who felt that particular magic of a place designed entirely for childhood joy, the memory remains. And sometimes late at night, scrolling through Amazon listings for your own children's toys, you miss it. Not for any rational reason. Not because the old way was better. Just because it was different. Because it was yours. Because growing up means losing things you didn't know you'd miss until they're gone. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. None of us wanted to grow up. But here we are anyway.